Up next, we have a panel that in one way or another has affected, I believe, most of our lives in this room. We have gathered some of the leading minds in addiction and recovery industry to speak on how their models are making a major impact in South Florida and the rest of the country. Welcome to the stage, Brad Sorte, Executive Director of Care On Renaissance and Care On Ocean Drive, Jason Bryan, CEO of Mako Marketing Group, and Ms. Jennifer Alford, CEO and founder of Jennifer Alford Consulting.
First things first, I'd like you guys to just give us the short and sweet. Who are you? What brings you out today? And just a minute on your perspective of why this is an important conversation. And just start right here to my right.
Well, good morning. My name is Jason Bryan. My Cliff Notes story is I've been in the lead generation and online marketing space for the last 8 years. My journey started 3 years prior to that. And right out of high school, my parents decided that they were going to move to Georgia and open a movie theater, and I decided to stay here. I jumped in the car business. 3 years later, realized that there was a lot of opportunity in the online marketplace. So I started a company called AutoCricket.com. We grew from 2 guys, literally sitting this close in an office, to 450 employees in 3 countries. Exited that it was in August of 2013, so about 3 years ago, to a private equity company in Austin, Texas, and decided that it was, you don't wake up in the morning and get excited about selling automotive leads or auto insurance leads, and so decided to get into a space where we could do what we do, which is marketing, but do it in a space where it could actually impact lives. And so about 2 years ago, started courting this industry and figured out that there's a lot of need. There's a lot of people that suffer from addiction, and we wanted to be able to put them in contact with treatment centers, reputable treatment centers all over the country that could ultimately help them and meet their need. When you're in an industry that the largest organization in it, their second name is anonymous, the first place a lot of people start is online. And so we started there and have grown to about 50 employees here in South Florida, and ultimately serve about 1,100 people a day that call into us seeking help with recovery.
And with you, you're talking about substance addiction?
Specifically substance addiction.
Yeah, okay, terrific. Jennifer?
Hi, well, I'm Jennifer Alford, and I am from New York, and for years I did marketing and promotions in New York, focusing mainly on alcohol and tobacco. And my background was always psychology. And I know about 10 or so years ago, I moved down to Florida because I wanted to actually focus on what my major was. And so I decided to utilize my degree, and I started doing therapy, and I started out in working in treatment centers, and a little less than a year ago I went out on my own private practice, but I was told that I should specialize in gambling about 6+ years ago, and that's really my niche, amongst others, shopping, hoarding, shoplifting, but gambling is really my passion, and of course, you know, all the substance abuse. But we're talking about social responsibility. I'm really going to focus a lot on the irresponsibility.
And your firm, what does your firm do? Just to describe it.
I do private practice, a lot of individual, and then I have a whole consulting aspect, and the consulting is really on, there's a lot going on with all of the class action suits, with those of you that follow, with DraftKings, FanDuel, and what I'm looking to do is really level the playing field in the sense that get everyone on board together, states, local, federal. It's because DraftKings and FanDuel, they're not gambling sites per law.
These are like they're like fantasy
They're
football kind of
daily,
stuff,
yep,
right? That's what it
daily
is?
fantasy
Okay.
sports. They
Yeah.
are not gambling, and they are, according to the law, they're not. But what I'll start to talk about after Brad speaks and introduces himself, what the states are doing with their lotteries, where many people think the money's going, it's not. So everybody is really just as culpable for being irresponsible, and people are really not aware of that.
Brad?
Great. Excuse me, I can clear my throat. My name is Brad Sorty. I had a journey in this industry where I started off as a psychotherapist, but when I was going through my training to do that, I experienced a lot of organizations in the healthcare space that seemed to be run by one of two different types of managers, either senior clinicians that have been promoted into positions of management just out of their seniority but didn't really have a business background, or business people with no clinical background. And in my experience, both of those situations led to problems with clinical care and ultimately problems with the bottom line. So while I was doing my studies to become a clinician and working as a therapist at the organization I'm at now, I also pursued an MBA with the hope of, one day being able to add some value to this large part of our economy that it many times can be seen as pretty dysfunctional. It was about a year ago now. The company that I'm the executive director of is a company called Caron of Florida, which is two programs in Boca Raton, Caron Renaissance and Caron Ocean Drive. It's a separate 501c3 not-for-profit, but part of Caron Treatment Centers, which has a large campus in Pennsylvania. Our founder retired, and it's kind of a unique organization. And I think it fits very nicely within the conversation that we're having today, because Caron Renaissance had originally started as a for-profit organization, but which was purchased by Caron Treatment Centers in 2003. And so part of the balance that we have tried to maintain there is, how do you maintain an entrepreneurial culture within a not-for-profit system? And so I think that it's been an exciting transition for me to be able to bring my clinical background with some of the more formal business skills that I've learned to be able to continue to grow and keep that mission alive.
Mm-hmm. One thing that's interesting is all three of you are social entrepreneurs of a sort, and it would be interesting to have this conversation speak a little bit through that lens and hear a little bit more about your stories. But there's so many places that this conversation can start. I'm just going to sort of throw a dart there and start with something that seems obvious to me. If this isn't obvious, tell me why. Let's just start with something like alcohol, which has obvious social downside, but it has an upside too. People enjoy it. It's a social catalyst, so on and so forth. Something that everybody's pretty familiar with. Where do you even start the conversation when it comes to the ethics of selling alcohol? You're a beer company or working for a beer company or something. Where do you even start that conversation? Who wants to go first?
Sure, I'll take a stab at it. I mean, I think that there's, I think that too often, and I think it happens too often in our field, there's this desire to try to want to boil things down to a black and white dynamic. You're either on the good side or the bad side. Things are either right or they're wrong, as opposed to seeing things through the lens of gray. That for, probably, a little over 20 million people in this country who need treatment. Estimated about that many people need treatment.
How many was that again?
About a little over 20 million, 21 million, 24 million, something in there.
10% of the population.
Something to
I
that
would have thought it was
effect.
higher, but that's
Yeah,
that's good.
So again, just kind of an estimate there. We also have 90% of the population that doesn't. So kind of looking at it through the lens of the individual's right to choose and the individual's right to self-determine. If somebody is responsibly enjoying alcohol, if somebody's responsibly having that as a part of their life, their behavior should not be demonized because someone else is struggling with it. The same way that because someone is struggling with it, they shouldn't be stigmatized. And a lot of the way that we like to look at that is, so somebody is struggling with alcohol, that's probably symptomatic of something else. That's probably, to focus only on that being their sole problem would probably be to miss the big picture, which is that might be their maladaptive coping mechanism for some set of problems that they maybe don't even have any awareness of yet. So I think that there's a lot of conversation around the substance itself, which I think is kind of a rabbit hole. I think that we end up focusing on that and pathologizing that behavior as opposed to recognizing that, well, maybe that's just the only tool that somebody has. And if we shift the focus to, well, what are the tools that are missing, and what is the underlying wound or trauma or family of origin experience that they have not yet dealt with, that they're acting out to deal with, we can get a better picture of how to provide a sustainable environment for lifelong recovery.
And to jump on that, the 19.8 million people that Brad identified, there is $18 billion of resources that are allocated for treatment. That's million and then $1 billion that are allocated. Whereas with the gambling, it's 5.8 million that are identified, and there are so many more because that's the hidden addiction, because you can't smell it, you can't see it, and it's so under the radar. And gambling is social, it's fun. Everybody goes to casinos. Nobody really realizes that it's an issue until all of a sudden the bank accounts are wiped out and there's a suicide attempt. It's the highest suicide rate.
You think comparatively, alcohol issues are relatively well funded, gambling issues
Yes,
poorly funded.
and the funding that goes for it, and it's not funding for treatment, it's just overall funding for services is 60 million.
That's it, as opposed to
60
18
million,
billion.
and that could go to anything.
So it's next to nothing, basically.
Yeah, because it was originally allocated for educational programs. That was the whole thing. It was the state lotteries were going to go to education, and at first, the first year, it goes to education, and then it drops off. For instance, Colorado goes to Parks and Recreation, but that's only a small portion.
You mean the lottery revenue? Yeah,
But
right.
2/3 go to the prizes, and then a portion goes to Parks and Recreation, and then it goes to the administrative staff. And by no means am I an advocate to shut down gambling. That would be the same thing as prohibition. Then it goes underground, and that's more dangerous. It's about regulation and allowing people to get the help they need.
Let's come back to that in a second, because that's a terrific point. But Jason, just let me know a little bit about where do you start this conversation from the perspective of a hypothetical company or organization whose profits are in some way tied into something. I said alcohol, but could be gambling, whatever.
Sure. I think that we have to remember the society and the time that we live in, where things like alcohol are put in the spotlight. When half of Super Bowl revenue comes from alcohol companies, when we've almost created an idol of this party lifestyle that we live in that culture today. That is the reality of the world that we live in, and I think to a certain degree we've gotten better. I say we culturally we've gotten better by encouraging people to drink responsibly but I think that there is a level of burden that ultimately has to be put on. We don't see the late night, in the images and the pictures. We don't see the next morning. We've all had that next morning where you're like, man, that was probably not the best decision I made yesterday. Those aren't the things that we put on TV. Those aren't the game day tailgate. As a culture, we have to understand that what we see in the media and what we see as marketing ultimately is not always the total picture. It's oftentimes the front end of the picture. It's oftentimes, again, a catalyst that will allow us to have an enjoyable time. But I think that if we understood kind of collectively as a group that there are other things ultimately that can contribute to having a fun night or a fun time, I think that that's just important to remember.
So I'm curious, from all your perspectives, when we talk about whatever the issue is, gambling, it doesn't matter. Where do you find that balance, I guess it is, right? We know that there's a problem with typically it's a smaller, it's a small percentage of people, but it's a major problem, let's face it. Sort of lost my train of thought. Where do you guys try to find that where you're drawing the line between the companies or in the case of the lottery, the government or whoever's,
Well, whether it's the states, the
State,
government, or also companies, DraftKings, FanDuel, whomever, the Fantasy Sports Trade Association,
right.
I don't discriminate, it's whomever.
I guess what I'm getting at is where do you find that sweet spot, right? The company knows, well, we've got a certain amount of responsibility and we got things right, but we're going to draw the line somewhere here. Because somewhere over there, these treatment people and these, nonprofits and so on, well, they'll take care of the real problem, right? Or you might think that was the attitude. Where do you find, how do you, in your opinion, where does that sort of realm of responsibility start and end?
Well, I think certainly with the younger population, I think that we have, when looking at how impressionable adolescents are, young adults are, that efforts to create education, prevention, other resources, family resources for young adults and adolescents, and even younger than that, who are experiencing these issues early on in life. I hope that continues to be something on the social conscious of people who are engaging in these different industries, because that's where the seed gets sown for much more significant problems later on in life. And so I think that if we were to say, well, where would we want those efforts to be focused? And I know to some degree that they are. Tobacco, certainly in the past 15 years, has shifted a lot of dollars to provide resources for prevention and education within the school system. I think that if that was going to be a demographic that we need to be the most conscious of, it's going to be the impressionable young adult and adolescent.
Yeah.
How about you guys? Where do you guys?
Well, the impressionable young adult, but think of those of you that are sports fans or even casual sports watchers. Any given Sunday or college, Saturday, Monday, Thursday, could tell I enjoy my sports. You can't watch without seeing. I mean, the airwaves were blanketed this year with DraftKings, FanDuel, and what my research uncovered was that it was fathers and sons. They were playing together, and it became a bonding experience for a way for a dad and his son to have something to do together. And
for those of us who aren't familiar with it, just tell us how do those things work? The
well,
DraftKings, for example.
Yeah, it's the fantasy drafts where you pick your league, players from all different teams, and you build your roster. So you could have, 2 quarterbacks. You could choose a different one each week. Your running backs, tight ends, a defense, and you're just creating your own football team, so to say. And you're in a league with whether it's 12 other or 11 other teams, and
then somebody wins a prize, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you put in $20 or something, and then it's like
Yeah.
office football pool, sort of.
Correct. It's an office football, but it's a fantasy league. Now, what was happening is now they were daily games, and it blew up online, and people were losing tons and
'Cause
tons of money because they were. People thought it was a level playing field, and you had people that were writing computer code, scripting is what it's called, and they were developing rosters that were 10,000 at a time. So it wasn't a level playing field, but it also wasn't considered
Legally, it's not gambling.
right.
Okay.
that's the issue because of the 2006
As
law
far as
that's in
we're
effect.
concerned in this conversation, pretty much is, right?
Yeah, but it's
Okay.
a game of skill, but nevertheless, but it's the same thing when I hear a mom tell me that she gave her daughter something to drink at age 18 because she knew that it was going to make her stomach feel better. So right then and there, that's the same type of behaviors. And what Brad was saying, this has to start at home because gambling is the one addiction that's learned behavior, and that's a fact, that's a known study. And even with the alcohol, it's mom is saying, that's okay, as long as you're doing it with me, don't worry about it. And it's
Yeah.
it's
But I guess
wrong.
what I'm getting at is it's of course that makes sense. These kind of things have to start with people, and it's a cultural thing. And it's outside of the realm of these companies that are putting this stuff on. Sounds to me like this DraftKings thing is sort of borderline fraud if they knew that was going on. But that's another conversation. But in the sense of the rest of these companies, I mean, where is the company on the hook for the responsibility in terms of the marketing? Because there's going to be cultures and families that don't prepare their kids or have problems for whatever other reasons, right? Where do you draw that line? Like the company's responsibility is this or it's not? Again, maybe it's black and white language, but how do you find that spot?
Can I paint a
Yeah.
slightly variable picture on that? We're talking about specifically the adolescent population and how vulnerable that population is to influence, and we're talking about some 20 million folks that are afflicted with addictions nationwide, and that's just from the data that can be collected. If we look at the landscape today of treatment, because we're talking about preventative steps, we're talking about things that maybe marketing that people should be held accountable for. We're talking about preventative steps on the front end. Maybe a fair question would be to say, for those of us or for those of the population that have been afflicted or affected by addiction, what are we doing as an industry collectively to address that? And just to paint a picture of today's landscape for you, adolescents in treatment terms are 13 to 24-ish, give or take.
Yeah, depending. Some people would look at it 18 and then break it down to the demographic of 18 to 24 as young adults. But in terms of the impressionability of them and the family dynamics, it's usually that 14 to 24 age
Or
group.
older, depending on
Right. And so again, just to cast that net and say that's adolescence. Today, in the studies that we've done, and we have literally treatment centers all over the country, less than 2% of the treatment centers that we work with actually accept adolescents today. So we are very much aware of the impressionability that these adolescents have. And I'm going to cut off adolescents at 18.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're talking
Because it's-
24 or true
talking
adolescents
true adolescents.
prior to 18?
Correct. And as an industry, again, because most of us aren't in the industry, I'm going to paint the picture that has a lot to do with the way that insurance companies regulate how they pay out. So I would cast just a little bit of a tone to say, what as a culture, which we all influence policy, we all influence carriers that provide insurance, how responsible or how much do we cast the burden of actually treating individuals at this vulnerable stage? Because here's the reality: mom, dad, sister, brother that are older, ultimately that are making these impressions on the adolescent population, the young folks. Ultimately, if they were responsible in that, which we're talking about responsibility and irresponsibility, they wouldn't be casting that on these adolescents. So we have to be aware and understand that this is a population that is already, they're seeing this stuff at home. It's mom, it's dad that have the drink. It's say let's participate in this gaming together. But then what do we do once we get to that point where we recognize that hey, somebody does have an issue? And today there really isn't a lot of viable options for that person who is a young folk, somebody that is not old enough yet to really go to treatment, and then they begin to mature, and these behaviors and these tendencies begin to solidify within their behavior, And now you have an adult that these things have solidified in them, and now they are the person or the individual that is now casting on their younger, the people that are their influence, and you have this vicious cycle that is addiction. We heard from Charles Bender this morning, Place of Hope Charles, and Charles and I are really good friends, and we had a conversation early on about the children that ultimately end up in Place of Hope. Most of them, the parent has some sort of addictive behavior that has caused the neglect or that has contributed to the neglect or abuse that these children end up in anyway. So we're trusting the parents who, in this stage of the game, might not be the ones that are showing this responsible behavior. So as a culture, what can we do socially to make a difference and an impact within the influence that we can make to encourage policy and encourage our carriers that ultimately we're paying to provide insurance for us to be more responsible with the younger generations.
Well, I think that's two different types of family systems. There's a very dysfunctional, unhealthy family system where there's substance abuse issues in the system with the parents. So as opposed to a family system where the parents are not realizing how their actions and behaviors may be not causing but contributing to some maladaptive traits that may occur later on.
Right.
And that's the prevention.
Either way, though, at that point you arrive, whether it's either of those two modalities, you arrive at a young person who has now been, who now burdens this behavior, and then as a culture, what do we do to help those individuals?
But they've been exposed. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to.
Not all, of course, not all.
Yeah.
But when our treatment providers, which is ultimately who pays my check every day, okay? When 1 in 40, 1 in 50 of these treatment centers are equipped to meet that need, because I hear we have 1,100 calls a day. Probably 150 of them are adolescent parents that don't know what to do, and when we don't have the home or the opportunity to help these individuals, it's a major problem.
Well, I think there's two challenges there. I think one of them is, and I'm sure that you guys have experienced this as well, that medical necessity is extremely difficult with adolescents.
That's right.
So if you in an industry where the vast majority of providers are really looking to either be in network or use out of network benefits, they're taking an extraordinarily large amount of at-risk payment because, under the age of 18, generally speaking, you're going to have a really hard time getting medical necessity for that. I think another part of it too is I think that our language and our the vernacular that we use in describing substance use disorders within the adolescent population, I think we need to be very careful with that. Whereas I've seen people who are 16, 17, 18 years old where their behavior, the scope and breadth and consequences of their use certainly meets the criteria for addiction, many don't. And I think that there's two pieces to that. I think we have to be extraordinarily cautious as professionals not to label somebody who may not be that, and also not create barriers to that individual and their family to engage in treatment in saying, well, wait a second, how do you know? My kid's 15 years old. Yeah, he's smoking pot, yeah, he stole alcohol, he took money out of my wallet, he's getting in fights at school. But taking a more holistic look at it and actually recognizing that it's not necessarily just about the substance use, it's also about all these other things. And again, challenges come in, which is, well, how if most of this is funded through a third party, how are we getting a third party to pay for, dysfunctional family dynamics, the budding personality disorders, things like that are not reimbursable. So for a lot of people, we have this dearth of adolescent treatment because it's an unappealing business for a lot of people because we haven't figured out, in my opinion, how to accurately define it. And also set it up in a way where it can be a sustainable business model for anyone who's not in a cash-pay system.
Right.
This is really, really, really good. To build on that, it's sort of a big question. you know, addiction per se as a human trait is not a new thing, right? I mean, it's been around one way or another forever, presumably. Are there things about today's society and how we've built things and structured things and made things complex and so on that you feel might be exacerbating these underlying conditions that drive addictive behavior? And if so, what might
Sure.
some of those things be?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I think has been a huge factor has been access and information. You know, I mean, if you're looking across the spectrum at things, you know, the ability to access information about stuff and then also access whatever that thing might be is very different today than it was 15 years ago. You know, you can look to, if you want to look at sexual compulsivity and sexual dysfunction, the accessibility of pornography via the internet. You know, whereas if, you know, a 13-year-old in the 90s or in the 80s would have to, you know, get a magazine from somebody or find a way to purchase a movie from an adult store they couldn't get into, you know, at the age of 8 or 9 years old, they can very easily access free pornography on the web. And we've seen a really large increase in the sexualizing of younger populations to an alarming degree. I remember Patrick.
Are those two different things? Access to pornography and the sexualization,
no, I think
marketing, and so on, or
I think
go
they're
hand in hand?
Well, I think it's very much connected. I think that, and what's happening is we're having not young adults even, but young adolescents developing an extremely distorted picture and viewpoint on what sexuality is. They're seeing pornography and they're saying that's what sex is, and they're seeing, the objectifying of people. They're seeing, you know, things that, you know, are not what an intimate, healthy, loving relationship is, and they're engaging in those behaviors from a young age. And one of the really alarming things is the increase in throat cancer at a younger age as a result of HPV and oral sex in early adolescence, including single-digit age children, you know, 8, 9, and 10 years old. As another kind of component of that, we have access to research chemicals, which are not illegal substances that are analogous to illegal substances that have the same effect. You know, new drugs that we hear about, like spice and bath salts and things that are coming on the market before they can be made illegal, and even things such as the Silk Road, which, for, you know, the simplest definition, is basically became the Amazon of illegal substances. You could use bitcoins, anonymously purchase heroin, and have it shipped right to your door. And so now we have this accessibility for people and access that before you'd have to, you know, drive into a certain part of town or know the right person to actually get something, where it's as accessible as everything else is in kind of this instant gratification age.
Now that's all just about the access and availability of things. Are there other things about, you know, I don't know, the pressures of day-to-day life, or the, I don't know, I'm reaching a little bit, but are there other things besides just, you know,
The
the presence
accessibility,
of this
yeah.
stuff?
I
that-
think the families. I think that there are family members that are so anxious that they may find a pill, boom, you're going to treatment. And that's it. They're going, and because a parent is so nervous based on everything that they've read, seen, and that's that red flag. And sometimes the red flag is appropriate based on DUI, legals, failing out of school, whatever it may be. But other times it may have been somebody taking a pill, and it could be sit down, have a conversation, open, honest communication, see what's going on within the family system. And a lot of healthy communication has broken down because, hey, iPhones, texting, people forgot the art of communication, and it's, we're sending our son, we're sending our daughter off to treatment, let somebody else deal with it.
Yeah, that seems like a really huge point, right? I mean, you can't really put these genies back in the bottle, can you? I mean, it's out. But if we create a dialogue to talk about it, learn how to, deal with the presence of these things, then
Yeah,
that
and
seems
people
like
are
a,
afraid to. It's they
Uh-huh.
are so scared to just broach that topic, and they want to put it on somebody else, and then it's left to the clinicians to truly re-educate, or not even
Yeah.
re-educate, educate the patient and the family system how to communicate with each other.
yeah, I want to bring Jason into the conversation a little bit, and we've got kind of a time for one more big question, and then it's your turn again. As social entrepreneurs, which you all are, and we've talked a little bit about your personal stories a little bit, but I'm curious if you could tell me, how a sort of an entrepreneurially minded approach might start to stoke that conversation, might start to stoke the drive towards solutions. If it's treatment straight up, that's cool. But if it's conversation, if it's awareness, if it's different ways of thinking about how companies that are in these potentially addictive business, market themselves and do business, wild card. Tell me a little bit about how entrepreneurial thinking can help, address this. I'm not going to say solve it, but address this problem.
From my perspective, and again, let me cast the vision for it. We have these 1,000, 1,100 calls a day that come into us, and we touched it a second ago, Brad, which is a very, 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 very small percentage of these individuals have what we'll call the means, be it insurance or finances, to be able to attend a traditional treatment methodology. Our studies show it's as small as 8%. I mean, it really is a very
Which makes sense because economic conditions just can make all of this stuff worse, can't
Sure. I mean, just think about the people in this room. There's probably 100 individuals in this room. How many individuals have private insurance? How many individuals could take 28 days out of their life, leave their families, leave their studies, leave their school, to actually go to an inpatient program? How many of these individuals have $30,000 in cash that they can and would be willing to put down to go to one of these programs if necessary? You begin to see a very small window of people that are actually able to go to what is today structured as treatment and as an opportunity, because you have this social impact side and you have this entrepreneurial side. There's a huge opportunity, I believe, if an organization such as ours or such as Karen or any other treatment facility for that matter could establish and design a program that could meet the needs of the other 90-something%, where there would be a low-cost available opportunity where, as available as apparently getting the substances are, why can't we make the availability of treatment or the availability of some sort of care that way also? There are two very specific things that I don't want to miss here. The social impact of it. If we take what we said today and we say that our hands are tied to insurance companies and third parties that ultimately are providing the means for us to go to treatment, then we miss this giant population of people. And there's really not going to ever be large-scale social change in this particular space unless we identify those people and those needs, and we make care available to them as well. Because just serving the affluent, it would be like saying, hey, the only people we need to serve is the people on the island.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make a lot of sense to me that all we're able to do today is serve the people who can afford to go to treatment. If we could figure out a true social impact on the others, I think there's actually a huge revenue opportunity in scale.
Mm-hmm.
There's a huge revenue opportunity. It's why large corporations like Walmart and Amazon and a lot of these other organizations make a lot of money, is because they decided, instead of being a small niche facility that's going to serve this population, that they're going to serve a mass population.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's an incredible opportunity out there to serve that population.
I think that's another huge point. I'm not an expert in this concept of social impact bonds. I don't know if you know about this, but and I'll let one of you guys to jump in. But yeah, the concept is basically that it flies in the face of a lot of political ideology and even what some people would think of as common sense. But it can actually be cheaper it's just a totally financial calculation, cheaper for the taxpayer to give free treatment to chronic, substance abusers, homeless people, etc., than to not.
Well,
It's a
forget
sim-
about the taxpayer. How about with everything going on, all of these companies that are getting hammered, donate, give a portion of
Yeah.
all of their money.
pays- absolutely.
It will take away all of these frivolous lawsuits, because they are, and all of this state-funded money that isn't going where it's supposed to go, give it to treatment and the appropriate programs. Problem solved. It's a
Can I add-
win-win
We've done it.
on
We've
both
solved it.
sides.
Yeah.
Can I add one
Yeah.
thing to that, because I think it's really important,
Yeah.
that we don't continue to reward bad behavior. When you study the cycle of addiction, people end up going back several times. We need to hold the providers of care, the centers, ultimately, we need to incentivize them to make sure that when they do well, when their outcomes data shows that they're performing, that they are incentivized. Because today, the incentive is really not there to continue to, I mean, if somebody's got a great insurance policy and they want to keep coming back, a lot of really reputable centers won't allow that to happen, but there are a lot of centers out there that will actually continue to take somebody back, continue to milk this insurance policy. And the other side of it is ultimately rewarding good behavior.
I'm not even talking insurance-based, I'm talking they're paying for it, and there aren't even any gambling treatment centers currently in Florida. So I have a whole plan already in place, and I've already been reaching out to people, because it's absurd.
Quick thoughts better than I want to open
Yep.
it up to the
Very-
to
very-
folks, so
very-
we got to get to the...
Very quick.
Are we done, or is it... I guess we're done. Or is it Q&A time? Yes,
Okay.
Q&A. Quick thoughts,
Very
we'll do
quick.
Q&A.
So I just wanted to piggyback on something Jason said, because I agree that what is true today in terms of what we can do is completely different than what we could do 15 years ago. We can monitor people better today on an outpatient basis than we could under our roof, because of the growth and the disruption of the mobile device and technology. There's a really brilliant guy out there. I suggest anyone who's interested in this, look him up. His name's John Haskell. He has a company called Trigger Health. It is a truly predictive device, app you download on your phone, completely passive, no user input, that monitors all the data, text messages, geolocation, light to see if your light's going on in the middle of the night, who you're calling, and compares it all to your previous phone use during your time of addiction, runs it through an algorithm, and uses crowdsourced data to know at-risk locations to determine a risk level for that person. Feeds that information back to your therapist and gives positive reinforcement to the user. So this is the direction that we're going in. You know, I've said it, I gave a keynote last year where I said this. I genuinely believe that in the next 10 to 15 years, we will see our reliance on residential treatment drop significantly, because the benefits of the structure of a residential program will no longer be necessary with the tools that we will have available to us, which will allow access to high quality care to be much more generalizable. And I look forward to that day.
I think we had one here, and then we'll go with for you second, and then you. So short and sweet. We're a little on the time clock.
You guys talked about how adolescents are the most susceptible demographic to addiction problems. How important is comprehensive drug, sex, and addiction education into preventing that from becoming an issue?
I mean, I think it's extremely important. I don't think we have it, though. I mean, I think that a lot of places say they have it, but I think that it's you know, if I remember kind of, you know, when I was in high school and in middle school, it was, you know, maybe values class or health class that no one really took seriously. There'd maybe be, you know, a police officer would come in every once in a while, because I think too much of the focus was on the adolescent and the young adult, and it wasn't done systemically. So my belief is that if we're really looking at it being a comprehensive prevention program, that comprehensive component of it needs to be a longitudinal involvement with the family as well, because they're gonna play such a key role in that prevention piece.
Terrific. Right there, and then you're next.
So throughout the speech, you guys talked about a lot of different topics from like the beginning until the treatment occurs, but like a lot of what hasn't been talked about, and is a big part of just social enterprise in general, is what happens afterwards, going forward. What do those people that have received treatment do? It was touched on, some of them go back, but there's some that don't. As far as the stigmatization of the alcoholic or the addict, what can the rest of social enterprise or the rest of our community of social enterprise cultures do to assist with that lack of stigmatization, also employment, and moving forward, so those people can see future or see hope?
I mean, just one small thing, and if everyone who here lives in Palm Beach County, you guys know it all too well if you read the paper. We need to stop focusing on the problems, and we need to focus on the people that are getting well. You know, I mean, there's so much focus on the relapsing, the overdosing, you know, the you know, unethical behavior that's occurring. But what's not getting focused on is that for each person who relapses or overdoses, there's plenty of people that we can't even count who got sober, they're working, they're serving you coffee at Starbucks, they're managing your money at the bank, and we don't talk about those stories. I think if we really want to work together to change the stigma and we want to help those people come out in the open and support them, we need to be talking about the successes as opposed to being so problem-centric.
And the people that are actively using, that everyone forgets about those people also that actually stopped and went to get help, and it makes it that much more difficult for somebody to say, I have a problem, and to go get that help, because they see what happens when they get the help. They're stigmatized for actually going and getting healthy, and it makes them feel as if, why did I bother to do this? Because I went, I got healthy, and what I hear from them is, what was the point? Because I'm getting the finger pointed at me now because I opted to get healthy. Life was easier when I was still using, and from everything that they're being told, it kind of was in that sense. They get shamed when they got healthy.
Very good. We got time for just one more.
Are sober houses, are they a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, we hear a lot of negativity in the media about sober houses causing so much social problems. But are they really, is it really such a problem? Can you give us your perspective?
You said sober houses?
Sober houses.
Sober houses, okay.
It depends if they're following certain rules and guidelines. Under Florida has guidelines following FAR, which is they have to be mandated by the state of Florida. They have to register, and if not, then there are some that are flop houses.
I think a lot, I'm sorry.
That's what were you going to say?
I think a lot of it too comes down to what Brad said, is that there are probably way more that are doing well, that are doing good things, and we just hear the negativity that ultimately surfaces. But there's far more that are doing really well for people and helping them to continue their sobriety journey.
The squeaky wheel gets the oil, and that's how it's going to be.
But some, you know, like, you know, having standards, which we finally have started to have in the state of Florida, I think is a good thing, because for a long time it was, you know, essentially
Free-for-all.
free-for-all.
Yeah.
But they provide an environment where people who are transitioning into a life of recovery can do that. We need to make sure that we're supportive of the ones that are doing the right thing, and, you know, we move on from the ones that aren't.
Well, guys, that was a terrific conversation. I'm really glad that we got into it. It was a topic that, you know, it's a very personal topic, and I think it's the kind of thing that really, you know, it demonstrates a big piece of the social component of this conversation that is easily forgotten. So a quick round of applause for our panelists.
Thank you.
And